Welcome to another Speedmaster video. I'm very grateful for a viewer who sent me an email to point out that this very beautiful watch had been the subject of a video where I had declared it a relume. I'd made this video during COVID and I'd got honestly sucked into this watch, and looking at very, very deeply under huge magnification, I had come to the conclusion, as a result of the markings on the 6 o'clock marker, that it was in fact a relume. So obviously I took the sale listing down and thought, right, I've got to find out if it is or it isn't. So the background to this watch is that I bought it about 10 years ago and I overpaid at the time. Now, because I overpaid, I sort of hid it in the back of the safe and didn't really bring it out until about a year and a half ago, and when I started to look at it, this very expensive watch, and I suddenly thought, well, if it's that expensive, I can sell it for a good price now. And then when I went to review it before offering it for sale, I thought, oh my goodness, it's relumed. Let's go through it and we'll look at the evidence as we find it. So of course, the first thing I did was to decase this watch and drop the movement and dial out so that I could take very high resolution photographs of the dial and the plots. And what I did was I focused in on each plot individually. And the first photograph that we're going to look at is the 6 o'clock marker that had me so concerned in the first place. Now, if we go very close in this, and don't forget my lights are super critical. So here we can see the 6 o'clock marker that's causing all the angst in my mind. And what we're looking at is this the sort of blurring or marks to the side of the marker. And it does indeed look, could it be binder? Could it be something? Now, if every plot had this, I would be worried. But let's look at the other plots. So let's go to the top of the watch and look at the top markers. And here we see those markers are highly defined, clean. There's no leakage, there's no binder, and if we look closely we see that the luminous material does not cover all of the plots. If we go to the left hand side and focus in, we can see the same thing. The plots are the luminous material is laid in a clean way onto the top of the dial paint, and the surface of it is very slightly uneven and very slightly granular. In other words, there's not really a polish to it. And if we go over to the right hand side and we continue looking, we also understand that there is a variation in color throughout the individual marker itself and the other markers, and it's a very slight variation. It's not something you really notice, but it's apparent. And this, I believe, is the patination and aging one gets in a natural watch. The only thing that worries me is that 6 o'clock marker. Now, like with all of these things, the best thing to do is to compare. Here is another 68 watch. It's not actually a 321, it's an 861. If we look at the plots and markers on this watch, they're very similar to this one. If we look at the surface of the plots, we see it has a similar finish to these. In fact, all Speedmaster plots of a vintage era have this kind of very slightly granular without being actually granular, because the actually granular plots, they've also been retouched, and I think that is because people scrape dials and they use the tritium and they mixed up in binders, and it's just too sugary. This is not sugary. Let's bring in a relume. This is a dial that I sent to the best relumer I know, and here we have these plots. Why here's another thing. Most of the relumes that I've seen choose to be slightly more orangey than the standard Speedmaster color, which is a sort of parchment color. And it's understandable. It's a very attractive color. When I wear this watch, it's a really nice, warm color. The natural color of a lot of Speedmasters is a sort of more yellowish or parchment color, sort of off-white. In the later models, of course, it can be greenish, and I don't like that personally at all. Some people don't mind it. But this is very definitely an unusual color. Now, if we pick this up, a couple of things that spring to mind, and that is the surface of the plots is shiny. We can go very close and see that the plots are shiny. They have it's not a polish, obviously, but it looks sort of smooth and shiny. Now, this is very typical in relumed that I have studied. Not like these two at all. So that's a mark against relume, because the surface doesn't look the same as known relumes. Here's another relumed dial. This is a modern Amiga service dial that I sent to remove the superluminova and to replace it with a modern tritium mixture. And we can see one of the most noticeable things about this is, again, it has got the smooth surface to the plots, but also the color is completely even. If we're looking to make a judgment on a watch, whether or not it is original or not, I'm looking at the color, I'm looking at the surface, and I'm looking at the coverage. This, of course, goes beyond the normal things we might look at, which is, you know, does it look like it's been laid on with a knife and fork? That said, some Ed Whites look absolutely terrible, the so-called wobbly lume Ed Whites, which often makes me believe that it's original if I see that wobbly lume. If I don't see the wobbly lume, I start to question it. The final piece of evidence that I was wrong to call this a relume is that I called Simon Freese, because he had the watch about 2 weeks ago, to check before I offered it for sale, because I always have a watchmaker check anything I sell because I don't want any problems. And he said, no, William, that 100% that is not a relume. So I was wrong, and I took the video down, but I also withdrew this from sale. Why? Because it's actually the best black dialed 145012 that I have. And perhaps I shouldn't be selling it. So there we have it. It's a lovely watch.